Chippies, I'm off to Australia for a month. I love you. Bins go out on a Tuesday. Mwah. Hey, this is Giles Mel coming to you with the first ever episode of my new Excel on the Road video series. I'm going to be sharing some of my experiences traveling the world, interviewing experts in the Microsoft Excel and the financial modeling industries. I want you to just see a little bit of what I get up to as a semi-digital nomad, but most importantly, I want you to get some real value from these conversations that I'm having with these experts as we discuss whatever the latest talking points are for us as Excel users, financial modelers, or finance professionals more broadly. This first episode comes from my time out in Australia, where I got the chance to speak to people about the new features in Excel like LET, LAMBDA and Dynamic Arrays, and to discuss what they mean for us and the work that we do day in, day out. But make no mistake, I also went down under to work on my own tan and to meet some of my own business community members at Full Stack Modeler. Alright, so here I am out in Sydney, Australia. It's hot, it's a little bit windy, I'm very excited. I've got a whole month here with a couple of pit stops to Cairns and Melbourne over the next few weeks. But firstly, I'm here to talk to a meetup group about, guess what, Excel and the changes that have taken place in Excel over the last 18 months or so and what I think that means for the average finance professional, the average modeler who I'm a little bit concerned for. But then, I'm hoping to get some time with some real pros out here. There are some really, really good modelling organisations, modelling teams and individuals who are such prominent parts of this community that I love so much. And I'm going to get a few minutes with all of them just to try and get their opinions on all of these most recent updates to Excel as well. All right, let's have a look at the talk first, and then we'll speak to some of these experts that I keep referring to. So I spoke to the meetup group out in Sydney for about an hour in total, and what I'm going to do quickly now is just give you a 5-minute summary of the key points that I raised. And then I'm going to share 2 fantastic interviews that I recorded when I was out in Sydney with 2 experts. The first of those interviews is with Danielle Stein Fairhurst. She is one of the most highly regarded modelers and trainers out there. She's a Microsoft MVP, founder of Plum Solutions. And after Danielle, I've got an interview with Rickard Wãrnelid, who is a partner at Mazars. He is somebody that's played a really significant role in the financial modelling industry for a decade, probably even longer. But before we get into those interviews, let me just give you the quick 5-minute summary of what I spoke to the meetup group about in Sydney. So for financial modelers, LET, LAMBDA and Dynamic Arrays pose an interesting challenge because we could now be solving problems, creating models in very different ways if we choose to. And the example that I showed in my talk in Sydney was this. Imagine you've got a really simple model set up with a couple of inputs, the start date and the model duration, and let's have a look at how we might build a typical or a traditional timeline. You've got each of these sort of blocks of logic here, these calculation blocks, developing a new line of logic. Here we've got the period start date, the period end date, the year for each of these monthly periods, and a quarter number. And you could then manually pull all of those individual lines into a sort of block at the top, and you can reference that to be the kind of underlying time structure throughout your model. It's a bit repetitive, it takes a little bit of time, it uses up a fairly decent number of rows, but that's kind of what most financial modelers have been doing in some way, shape or form for years. Well, now with LET, you could create a single array with all of that logic held and created within one cell. And what you see there in the formula bar is something that coders or programmers would be very, very comfortable with, but traditional modelers who've really spent most of their career in Excel's grid will, for the first time, be much less comfortable with. But we can take this further. With LAMBDA, we could actually call upon a named LAMBDA where all the user has to do is call up the LAMBDA and enter the individual ingredients that we define. But if you then go into the name manager here, you can see within the logic of that named LAMBDA, there's a whole lot of complexity, including all of the LET logic that I showed you on the previous screen. That's the first example. I've also got another example that looks at FIFO calculations. All right, so here's the second model, and this is all about calculating first in, first out inventory costs and cost of goods sold. So I've got two tabs. The first approach is what I would call the sort of traditional approach, and you can see here that there's a lot of steps to the logic on the screen. We've got inputs for inventory, units produced, units sold, the cost of production of units in each period, and then bit by bit you work through all of this logic, including a number of these sort of two-dimensional blocks where you've got periods going horizontally and vertically, and each of these blocks has its own unique bit of logic that you have to work through, including some bits that can be quite confusing to get your head around. But eventually you end up with this calculation for the value of the cost of goods sold for each period. So it's quite tricky, it's quite fiddly, it's quite easy to get wrong, but I would also argue it's very important that you as a financial modeler understand the logic of what it is you're trying to create there. But what LAMBDA brings to the table is this option that you could actually kind of bring a lot of that complex logic into the background, perhaps by somebody that's just considered the developer, and then the user, the front-end finance user of the model, can just call upon the named LAMBDA. And there it is. That is all of the logic that you as the user have to input with this named LAMBDA, calling upon those input ranges at the top, and the LAMBDA spills out to give you every single element of the logic that I just showed you on the last tab, including those final calculations for the cost of goods sold. And it's all of these new capabilities, these new options of ways to solve things that make it such an interesting time, in my opinion, for us as financial modelers. We are going to see people using these new features, and we're going to see people also sticking very rigidly and defensively to the traditional ways of working. And both camps are going to believe that their position is the right one. There's going to have to be a lot of dialogue. I hope there will be a lot of dialogue in the coming years about the ways that we should use LET, LAMBDA and dynamic arrays to make our models even better than they are now. So that's a really quick overview of what I spoke to the meetup group in Sydney about. Now I really want to turn to Danielle and Rickard. So here are the two interviews that I had with these two experts out in Sydney. I hope you enjoy them. Danielle Stein, Fairhurst, Microsoft MVP, Master Financial Model, amongst other titles. It's good to see you again. You've been kind of a travel buddy for me while I've been in Australia. We're at one of the Full Stack Modeler members and a Women in Financial Modeling group members' houses, about to have a feast. And I thought I'd grab 10 minutes to talk Excel, talk Australia. So yeah.
Always nice to see you, and it's been lovely to spend some time whilst you're out here.
It's been amazing.
So what's your favourite part of Australia? How have you enjoyed your trip?
Well, I've been to Sydney, obviously. We're in North Sydney now. I've been to Cairns, I've been to Melbourne. I think Sydney's the place I honestly think I could see myself living in at some point.
You're just saying that, aren't you?
No. I know I've travelled quite a lot in the last few years, but it's the first place I've genuinely thought.
Well, I have travelled a lot, and I've lived all over Australia and all over the world, and I choose Sydney. I think it's the best.
Yeah, there's something about it. The speed of life feels a little bit more relaxed, certainly compared to like London. The weather obviously is amazing, and people are really friendly. So yeah, I really love it here. But we've met up 2 or 3 times. I did my talk at the beginning of the month.
Thank you for doing that. That was really well received. Everybody loved it.
Thank you.
We talked about LETs and LAMBDAs and all this new stuff coming out in Excel.
So that's why I've taken you away from the food and the drink for 10 minutes to just kind of get your opinion on this. I think people would be interested. So yeah, LET, LAMBDA, dynamic arrays. Where's your head at with all of this new stuff that's come out in Excel?
Yeah, I'm kind of into, it's a hard one, and you tackled this so well in your presentation, but I get really, I'm in two minds, because I'm really excited about all of this new stuff that Excel's bringing out all the time, and it's absolutely fantastic. And I feel like, particularly coming from a financial modelling perspective, I feel like they have finally paid attention to financial modelers and the issues that we have, with a consistency of formulas and that kind of thing. And these new features are fantastic. The problem is that not that many people are using them yet, and they can be, it just takes a really, really long time for people to start using them, and just the resistance to change is just so, it just takes a long time for it to become mainstream, and particularly with lambdas and let to a certain extent, they can be kind of complicated and make things more difficult for people, and people kind of get a bit of a mental block about them, and they avoid them, and it kind of creates this divide that you've spoken about so well. This divide between people who, that top, those people who know their technical skills are really, really up there, and the rest of us. And this divide, I just don't like it. I don't think it's a good thing for the industry in general.
I agree, and like you said, I touched on it a little bit. It feels like now there's just more ways of doing things in Excel. You're going to get people doing more.
It's confusing when there's 6 different ways of achieving the same result. Yeah, I remember they said that to me when I first did the first draft of the first dummy books the financial modelling for dummies that I wrote, and I said, well, because I often say, you could do it like this, or you could do it like that, or you could use an if formula, you could use an index match, or you could use this, and they're like, no. We show them one way. We show them the easiest way, because I don't want people to. But I tend to sort of give people options, because I don't want them to think that that's the only way of doing it. And they said, no, just give them one way, and that's the way. And which, is kind of. Yeah,
and I think sort of Let and Lambda feels like definitely a very complex area that people are going to have to try to get into now. Dynamic arrays feels different, and I know you're going to be talking about dynamic arrays at the Global Excel Summit next year, so I'm guessing you have probably taken more initially to dynamic arrays.
I guess I wanted to tackle dynamic arrays because they are just such a game changer. They just change everything, and particularly for modelling, for the way that we build formulas. It's really different. Like when you inherit a model and you're trying to dissect it, and you're like, when you see a dynamic array for the first time, and you're like, what the heck? It's really, really different. And that's why I wanted to talk about that subject, because it is so useful for modelers, but also something I think just need to become mainstream.
And do you generally see that being the way modelers will start to model with dynamic arrays more and more? Because it felt to me like you have to start going kind of all in if you're going to build like a 3-statement model with dynamic arrays.
Not every technique or not everything that you're trying to do in Excel is possible to do it with a dynamic array. So you're going to have to use conventional formulas as well. So I think using both, I tend to just use them for certain formulas that are appropriate. But there are certain things that we need to start doing, like giving formulas giving your models plenty of space, and not that dreaded spill error, just stuff like that. And that's what I'm going to be talking about at the summit.
Good. So I've got a few days left in Sydney. Is there anything else I need to do? Have you got any advice to me other than come back and do this all again?
Well, I hope you've been wearing sunscreen. That's my number one tip.
Apart from the first day on Bondi Beach where I burnt myself.
Yeah, you got burnt. Just soak up the sunshine. Get as much of it as you can with sunscreen on. Well,
thank you again for being so kind of hospitable. It's been an amazing month. We've spent a lot of time with members from our 2 different groups. And I'll be back. And I'll see you in February at the Global Excel Summit.
Yay.
Thanks very much, Danielle. Rickard, thank you so much for giving up some of your time to talk to me about a few things, hopefully. Australia, Excel, we'll see what else comes up. But this was supposed to be a sunny kind of vlog video, and yet again, my luck has turned against me. So is this normal for Sydney?
No, this is the first rain in Manly in like 20 years. Here in Sydney, it's typically always sunny, so it's a bit of an exception, but anyway, we'll be good.
Nice. So this is your kind of home turf. We're in Manly. The beach is around the corner. You can't quite see it, but this is probably one of the nicest places I've seen in the world in all my travels. Tell me about kind of your story. How did you end up here in Manly?
Yeah, so I've been here for 20 years. Moved from Sydney in 2003. did a bit of work. I came to study. That was the sort of official reason. And then, as many people, got stuck here. Did a bit of work for the Commonwealth Bank in project finance, and then started my own business in sort of around 2005, 2006. So it's just over 20 years now.
Wow. Okay, and this was Chorality, and you were the creator of the SMART guidelines. I think I'm right in saying the 10 guidelines.
It wasn't just me, but
Okay.
Chorality was pioneering that methodology, which was sort of back in the day when there wasn't a whole lot of best practice modeling out there. It was us and a bit of F1, F9 and FAST and Operis. That was it back in the day. Now it's developed quite a lot, and more people know a whole lot more about what financial modeling actually means and how to do it and everything around that. But yeah, it's coming up to a few years now.
But even that kind of amazes me. I guess I'd never thought about it, that even 10, 15 years ago, the idea that there were ways you should go about working with financial models, spreadsheets, wasn't even a thing. And you were saying to me earlier, like, it wasn't an easy ride getting people generally to accept this, right?
Well, I mean, initiated people got it, but just turned out that was quite a small clique of people. If you look at, I mean, the reason you're in Australia right now is because of the PPP regime that came out here, which is very similar to the PFI regime that happened in the UK. So I suppose the birth of financial modelling came from structured processes for large infrastructure projects for a long period of time where models had to be right.
Yes.
So that means if you look at who did modelling 20 years ago, they were Australian or they lived in the UK. Not necessarily English, but they lived in the UK. And since then it's spread quite a lot. So now this is a global accepted thing. Like if you're doing infrastructure, energy, PFIs, PF, this is you do this. Like everyone, you don't even need to ask which standard you're following anymore. You're just saying, I'm doing what's right and I'm following best practice, and people know what you mean then. That certainly was not the case back in the day.
But there is more than one standard out there, and this probably alludes to what we're going to talk about a little bit with the newer features. So it feels like there are kind of broadly agreed upon principles across the standards, and then you've got these little nuances of things that are a bit different across things like FAST and SMART and whatever.
Yeah, and look, those things that are now agreed are not, like, people don't even question them anymore.
Yeah.
Like, it's just obvious. Of course you're going to copy from left to right and from top to bottom, and you're going to, use fairly simple things. Some people disagree with that. Most people say, let's be transparent, let's make it flexible, let's make it work for the future, that sort of stuff. Everyone will agree with that. No one's going to go, no, I want it to be more complicated because that's cool, those days are gone, which is really cool. And I think what we've said, I mean, you talk about standards, we haven't never actually used that word of standard. We talked about when we called it SMART, and we called it Chorality, and now we're calling it Mazars financial modeling, right? We're talking about financial modeling guidelines, which is very much what you talk about now. Like, let's just make sure you're basically doing what's right for the end user now and then in the future. Standards are sometimes a bit more, they got some really strong benefits in that it's perfectly replicable, it's easy to build a factory and process and scale. The drawbacks is that it may be a little bit less enjoyable for the individual. It may mean that you get forced into doing things the way you didn't necessarily like it, but there's no perfect way. So for some, I mean, we actually use FAST internally for certain situations as well, because in certain situations it's perfect. In other situations, I guess less so, being polite.
And this, we're going to talk about LAMBDA Dynamic Arrays. It's kind of the whole topic that I came over to Australia for to do a financial modelling meetup on. But this is what really intrigues me. There are ways you can go about solving the same problem that are very different to each other. And my point in that talk a few weeks ago was, now that Excel has kind of evolved again, there are now X number of additional ways that you can go about doing things, and some of them are actually quite complicated. You've obviously had, at various points throughout your career, responsibility for sort of the output of teams of professional modelers, and that feels like a really unique case of, what would you do if you've got a team and you've got all this flashy new stuff that could be useful? Where's your head at with that?
Well, I think it's really important to, we say financial modeling as if it's a thing, right? And it is, but it's also very, very different ways of doing that. You could be like an M&A pitch book sort of guy, or where I am at, which is energy infrastructure, long-term contracts and concessions, or you might be in a finance team to do like business cases to say, how much am I going to save of putting my IT department in, in Sri Lanka instead of in downtown London? Very different ways of doing things, and it fundamentally changes the way you approach these things. So you see the novelty and the innovation now tends to happen in places where your models don't necessarily need to be circulated to other people. In fact, you're interested in the outcome per se. It's fundamentally different to a big part of my world and my team, which is we never build models for ourselves. We build models for investors, for funds, for sponsors to do a transaction, and then that model is going to stick around to provide transparency and flexibility to people to analyze and reinvest and restructure things for the next, it's a bit scary, about 20, 30, 40 years, right? Which means your model have to be a bit less exciting. It has to be, you have to focus on transparency and robustness much more than technical excellence and excitement and innovation. So understanding where you are on this horizon is particularly important. I feel people sometimes forget about that. If you start throwing in rocket ship lambdas into an infra deal for 30 years, first your model audits are going to shoot you down. Your sponsor's going to go, we don't know what's going on, and everyone's going to tell you you're an idiot, even though it's brilliant, right? So I think this is the biggest challenge right now, that in certain segments, people are pushing down and slowing down innovation because we're talking about horrible words like backwards compatibility. Everyone needs to understand transparency. It's just the opposite of new cool stuff, right?
Yes.
So understanding that is really, really important.
And if somebody then, just to take your kind of example there a bit further, if somebody turned up in a Mazars team, modeling team, and said, hey, I've got this cool Lambda that I've just built over the last few weeks. It does this thing 3 times faster. How would that be received, do you think, initially?
So, we have 2 dimensions, right? One is, if you're going to build it for a client and they go, I don't get it, it dies instantly. But if it's for our internal processes, like it helps us do model audits, we do a ton of model audits, right? And we also do a lot of training. So we train people who may be on the spectrum in a different way, right? They go, maybe they do some infra models, but they also do internal finance and business case evaluation. So they need to know both sides of this. So I think it's really important to have that in your toolbox, but you need to know when to use it and when not to use it. It's always been there. It's always been the same with pivot tables, which some people go, it's obvious, and other people go, it's black magic, right? Because there's no formula. All right, still amazing, right? If you've got a data set or whatever. But if you look at VBA, right? You hear this over and over again. You should always avoid VBA. Hold on. If you're going to automate Excel, this is what you do. This is it. Workflows, replications, macros, optimization. How else would you do that, right? So if you say that you don't need VBA, you're just throwing out a big chunk of that toolbox that you actually need to do something which is really, really powerful.
Yeah, I felt a bit bad after my talk actually, because I unintentionally went quite hard on VBA specialists.
Yeah, that hurt a bit.
Yeah, and my point there wasn't sort of I hate VBA. It was like the overuse of VBA, and I guess you could extend that to anything. Swap VBA Absolutely. For Lambda or whatever. It's VBA used in the right way. Yep. I know a common example is sort of the circularity of debt, where you can do a copy-paste macro.
Of course you do that.
Yeah.
Right. And some people might go, it can be solved algebraically, but you show that to a normal product finance user and they go, I don't get that. Why don't you do it just like the rest of the world? Yeah, that's then a better suggestion, right? So it's a tricky one where majority wins.
Yes.
Which is also a good way of, as I said before, like killing innovation. It's not always the best, but it's best right now. So then you got to train up and get a sufficient amount of people confident in how to use the new technology. You just look at VLOOKUP. We can have a death match on this, like the VLOOKUP, HLOOKUP, lookup, index match sort of thing. All right, now it's XLOOKUP. It's a pretty easy choice. You just do XLOOKUP, done, job done. But you show that to someone who doesn't know XLOOKUP, they're like, I like an index match with the sorting out parameter. Okay, doesn't mean that it's better. It's just known, right?
Yeah. Okay. So I guess in terms of Lambda, so I'd probably separate Let and Lambda and dynamic arrays. Do you have any excitement on the dynamic array front, where you've got pockets of modelers getting very excited by the idea of changing an input cell and your model goes from a 5-year monthly timeline to a 10-year monthly timeline. Does that like get you going at all?
It doesn't, because I think it's really cool, like the technology excites me. When it gets to financial modeling of traditional projects, no, it doesn't, because the template's been set up. Someone's done that a long time ago and it works. Right? You don't need to change the timeline halfway through your project. I get it, it's cool. I love it. Personally, I really love that stuff. How much time is it actually going to save someone? Very little, because no one's ever actually going to do that. Right? So I think that's the challenge. But when it gets to certain things like spilling functions and all that, of course you need to know those things. It's just obvious. Like I do a ton of that work. Like when I do my own stuff, like I download this, match them up, you need to know these things. But it's a different use case.
Yeah, that was, I think that's pretty much exactly where my head is at. It's like if you've got, as I described it a few weeks ago, your Excel geek hat on, your internal, I want to know as much as I can about what I could do in Excel, dynamic arrays, lambdas, like Python potentially, albeit I've never, touched Python. It's exciting to know there are things you could learn. I remember as a consultant that not one client ever said to me in my consulting days, please build me a model where I can change the timeline from 5 years to 20 years at the click of a button.
It's not a demand-driven solution. Let's be clear about that. But we shift out to lambdas, right? I mean, it's sort of what APIs did to C++ in a way. Going, hold on, you can standardize things and do whatever you want, and someone else may have certified that if you wanted to, like the whole sort of, if you go down that route, or you can just do whatever you want. Now that's cool. Is that going to confuse a few people who've never coded? Absolutely. Yeah. Would they prefer you to put 100 lines in and repeat that 50 times through a model? Yeah, they would. I'm not suggesting that's good for the world, but they still will, right? Coding is scary for a lot of people. So we need to get to that. We need to get to that baseline where, this is an acceptable coding level within Lambda or within VBA, and say this is something that can be signed off by a third party. But if you look at internal investment cases, if you've got a crack internal financial team and they put together like, these are the 6 amazing lambdas we need to do, import this, export that, slice this up, yeah, you're winning, right? Because you're saving time and your output is time and efficiency. It's not transparency. So you've got to choose that parameter. You can't win on all of them all the time.
You just touched on something that I wanted to get your opinion on, which is this concept of a black box. Yeah. It feels to me like this is the big conversation that is probably going to come up. It's Lambda and 5G Lambdas, which is a term that's been kind of coined by Craig Hatmaker. Lambdas where they're certified. They've been theoretically tested. So you could argue the user doesn't need to understand how it works. Yep. They just plug in the ingredients and the answer comes out. That concerns me because it feels like you're heading back down another black box route, albeit certified. But do you have a particular opinion on?
Look, I studied physics, right? I know a thing or two about algorithms, and they are black box until people accept what they are. Yeah. There's already quite a few things in Excel which are algorithms. They're not algebraic solutions. Like you look at Solver, for example. People love Solver or GoalSeek. They're not. They can give you the wrong answer if you don't understand, I suppose, algebra. Yeah. People still happily throw them in without understanding, like a quadratic equation is going to give you two solutions. Which one are you going to get? Well, it depends. If you get 2, you'll have a problem, right? But it's because you don't see the code, it gets accepted, right? Yeah. But this whole thing of black box, I used to work with a legendary guy at Combank, I won't name him, but he said, his boss said to him, it's difficult to tell the story without naming his name because it's built into what he said. He said, let's just say it this way, mate. Let's try anyway. Mate, I don't understand what you do at work. And this guy said, well, clearly that's a problem for one of us, right? And I do think that's a lot to do with that. Like you can't just accept that just because you don't understand something that is bad. It's only in Excel we're having this conversation. You go to C++, or you go to like people who actually do real data science, no one's going to say, I don't like what you do because they don't understand it. They're going to go, you need to get someone at your same technical level to certify that what you're doing is right. You can't have like managerial people saying, I don't understand, because that's not their job.
Yeah.
Right? So that balance again is quite important. I think this is the difference we see in infrastructure and energy, where you see like senior investment directors going, send me the model because I'm spending the weekend on it and I want to understand it. Someone should say, just don't do that.
Yeah.
You know, you don't need to understand this. Ask someone else to say, certified to someone you trust should say they understand and that's right. It's not your job, because you were good at Excel 20 years ago.
Yes.
Feels like I speak about myself now, but you know what I mean though? Like, it's important. Like, you're not going to ask someone who's at the peak of their career running multi-billion-dollar deals to say, you're going to now learn about lambdas and 5G lambdas and let and spilling functions. It's not going to happen.
So that's really interesting, and actually I'm really glad that somebody in your position's view isn't just very black and white, like everybody should understand everything that ends up in front of them. I think that's probably where the dialogue will go. What about sort of the roadmap for an average finance professional? Because you know your I guess experiences with trained modelers who need to be doing things in quite a consistent way.
Sure.
What about the average sort of finance professional?
Yeah, I have for a while struggled with average.
Yeah.
Not the average person, but you know, just a concept, because it's really hard to say what it is. But if maybe we could broaden and say, if you work in a world where you've got a mix of data, a bit of forecasting, a bit of historicals, you're reporting to someone who wants to understand what you do sometimes and maybe not. So basically you work with numbers and analysis and you don't really know what you're going to do tomorrow. All right? Should you know the new functionality of Excel? Absolutely you should. And you should really lean in and know these things, because otherwise, this sort of the conversation we had like 10 years ago, right, in the world, where people go like, oh, I'm not sure, should I learn pivot tables? But they still were really interested in big data. But if you send someone a data set of like, 5,000 lines, they're like, do I do like VLOOKUPs? Is that what I do? No, you don't. You learn pivot tables and you do a summary and you format that and you extract the information you need. And it's solid, robust, replicable. You can slice and dice any way you want. Like, you need to know the slices and this and the charts. You just need to know this. You can't just go, oh, I'm not sure. So I think it's the same thing with the new functionality. Now, you just need to know what it is and then choose what to do. Yes. You can't say, I'm not going to use that because I didn't take the time to learn it.
Yeah, you may not need to be an absolute sort of Jedi at Lambda, but you need to know enough to know where it might be appropriate. Yeah. All right, was there anything else in terms of financial modelling, the future of financial modelling, that you wanted to cover before I kind of ask you for a few closing tips on Australia?
I think it's probably worth, we're on this line where we sort of, a bit more Excel, a bit more functionality, lambdas and new functionality. The big thing that's happening now is AI in general, which also, if you're going to write the lambda, you do that in ChatGPT today, right? If you don't know what you're doing, you could do it that way. Is that going to be right? Sometimes. It's going to be scary? Absolutely it will be. But this is coming, right? And we see this thing like, do you even need to build a model for certain use cases? People are a bit obsessed about building models when they just need an answer. Sometimes you just need the answer. And how are we gonna, there's a big step between discrete scenario analysis and building this up, just compared to saying, I trust this. Speaking of black boxes, the big black box is AI. And you go, if I throw 10,000 assumptions in there and ask for a number, how do I prove that this is right? This is the big scary thing that's coming, but it's also there. Like, it's very much coming. So I think it's important that we start understanding that these things, it's not the absolute transparency will be dying in some situations. It's already completely gone in some situations. But for an Excel person who says, I'm going to learn new functionality in Excel, this is a big step.
We see that quite a lot already with Power Query. So when we talked before about sort of full stack and the typical journey of people that are going through the steps, functions, tables, pivot tables, Power Query's always been a really big one for us with automation and finance teams. You can take your Power Query M code now, plug it straight back into ChatGPT, just go, make it better.
That's right.
And it comes back out and it's 10 times better.
Yeah.
Do you see AI changing things in the world that you are involved in, Mazars and the modeling teams?
Yeah. It changes everything. At the moment we have to be very, very careful with client confidentiality and like intellectual property protection, that sort of stuff. But even things like, I'm not a native English speaker, for example. If I write an email, and I plug it into ChatGPT and ask it to be written as a native English speaker or whatever, as an accountant or a crazy financial modeling person, you get a different response, and you can learn a lot from that. And that's just straight language, right? If you then throw it out and go, and now please do this in French with a techie spin, it's pretty cool when that comes out. Then you go, like, give me a VBA code that does something similar and pulls it out. So we use it all the time for lots of different things. Not ChatGPT, we got internal things which are more like protecting more, but still, it is fundamentally changing things. But it's everything from image generation to suggestions on how to do things, travel planning, hotel bookings and recommendations. It changes everything in there. In the financial modeling world, absolutely, I think it's going to change a lot. To date, people are scared of the black box because it's a known thing in financial models. People say black box is bad. It doesn't have to be bad. There's also a lot of, like, with chatbots and AI, you can ask things like, how do I do this? Why should I do this? And you get an explanation. Could you show me step by step? Could you give me 3 small examples? And all those things it's pretty powerful.
I do love the idea of AI in terms of kind of training and teaching and discover, because it is pretty much the best teacher you could ever hope for, where you can ask it anything.
Yes, I do that. I spend quite a lot of time with my kids on their homework, especially like math, science and stuff that I like, right? And then they're slowly saying that they don't need me. Right? They go to ChatGPT and go, please explain trigonometry and on a right-angled triangle. Yeah. All right. And then they say, I got these numbers, what's the answer? And then they say, why? And it shows you that, and say, how do I document that calculation? Give me another example, a bit simpler, right? And it's far better than I could ever think of, which makes me somewhat redundant, I guess, but still, everyone wins. There's
a scene in one of the modern versions of Star Trek. I don't know if you've seen the modern film. So where's Spock from? I can never remember. Were you a Star Trek fan?
No, I wasn't. So I didn't even watch the original, so I'm lost at the start of this story.
I recommend this film purely for this scene, but Spock, they go back to like his home planet, and they've got this scene where they're training all of their kids in this race, and they're all just in little pods. It's like 360 pods that is essentially like virtual reality, but it's like, for me, that's the future of AI and training, where you're just sat there and you can ask it anything. You can go anywhere in the world or whatever it is. All right, that's massively off topic, but I always remember that scene because I thought,
like, this is coming. Well, it's not coming, it's here. And you got to choose on how you use it. So now, at the moment, within Mazars, we say to everyone, get to know this stuff. Like, invest into knowing this, because it's just everything. You just got to know and think about the use cases. They're not going to be presented to you. You think, if I can do something and I'm thinking, someone else could probably do this better. And that someone, it's not your colleague or your boss, it's going to be something else, right? It's scary, but you just got to win that race. Otherwise, you're giving up already.
All right, I've got 2 closing questions. I don't know how long we've been talking for, but I've enjoyed it. So the first one is just, again, based off everything you've said. Do you think, I don't know, 2, 3, 5 years down the line, the role of a financial modeler is still going to exist? Like, should we be that worried about it?
Mm-hmm. Look, I think it's going to change fundamentally in some segments. In infrastructure and PPPs, I don't think it's going to change a whole lot. Even though it should, I don't think it will, because the conservatism is significant. I welcome all this. Like, people think, I hear this a lot, people go, you must be worried about the new tools. But it's not true. Like, we are embracing and sponsoring these initiatives, because whatever makes that world better is better for us. So we'd love to see these, like, better model audit tools, new templates to build things, and easier ways of training people. We love these things. It's brilliant. But I'm not seeing them coming at rocket speed. Like, there's hope and there's possibility, but there's nothing there which has changed things too much to date. I do think when it comes to people who work with data and analysis, that will change. Especially what we talked about before, like, how do you learn, for example? Learning is now open to everyone, and you don't need to read the script. It's more like a problem-based solution learning. When you go, this is my world. I can't even phrase the question. Like, you can ask the question, I've got this input, I've got this stuff, what do I need to know? which is quite a broad question.
Yes.
But you're going to get a pretty good answer, and you drill down and keep drilling into that. But something we do know is that you need to know new Excel functionality. You know, we hear this every day, right? Oh, Excel's dying. Yeah, okay. I get a bit tired of that. Like, it's like saying like numerical analysis is dying. It's not. Sure, you could do this in Google Sheets or another platform. It doesn't really matter. You just need to say, have I got a structured way of analyzing data in a way? Yeah. And when I say data, I don't mean like, you know, billions of rows and data sets that, you know, we hear about it. But that's not the world of most people. They go like, I got 300 bank transfers last week that I'm going to reconcile to this account. All right, how do I do the quickest way so that next month I don't need to do anything? This is the job. And then I'd say, oh, I want a trend over the last 12 months, and then I want to have a forward-looking trend as well. Okay, that's the job for most people, right? And then you need to know what you're doing. You need to pull this in. You need to understand this sort of, the Power Suite, I guess. You need to know how that works. You need to know the spill functions and lambdas, just to say, the boring bits of my work are going to disappear, and I'm going to make them disappear so I can do more interesting stuff. I think that's the journey that we're on at them. Interesting.
I also think it's really hard to strongly argue the Excel is dead.
It's quite difficult.
When there are, what is it, 1 billion use of Excel? Yeah. Like it's clearly not, and Microsoft are clearly not just sitting back and taking their foot off the gas. So yeah, I think it's probably good.
Yeah, look, I think something that people don't talk so much about, but the integration of Teams and Excel and multi-user functionality that actually works is phenomenal. Like you can have now, we do this quite a lot, where you have some people building models and you have someone else somewhere else fixing up and reviewing in parallel. It's super cool. I mean, we talked about this. It's always been in Excel, like from 95. It's just that you just got the blue screen of death whenever you tried it. But on the features list, it was there, until you tried to save the file. It's like the mirror function in Excel, which was brilliant, but no one's ever used because it just didn't work.
Yeah, I personally and my business partner Mars have started looking a little bit into the sort of Power Automate space, which again is like another a rabbit hole of stuff you can get really heavily into. I'm slightly concerned people will start using it because it's cool and clever and new as well, but it is interesting.
I think you need, it used to be called like, the Excel guy in the corner. Every office had one of those, like the troll who's like, I'm going to nail this, right? You still need someone like that who goes, what can you do with this? Doesn't mean that they need to drive the business strategy, but they're incredibly valuable. Like you need someone who knows Power BI, you need someone who knows this, know all the lambdas, and just does things and makes it work, and then it's for other people to make sure that it's understandable and replicable. Yeah. But these are the people who bring the world forward and say, I can learn this. I've spent all weekend on coding this stuff up. This is pretty cool. And then it's for other people to find that use case.
All right, I've pretty much covered everything that I had on my mind, apart from I fly back to the UK tomorrow. I've kind of fallen in love with Australia in general, but in particular Sydney. I'll be back. What should I be doing when I come back in a year's time? What have I missed?
I think you should, maybe some sunshine. Yeah. That could be nice. Now look, it's really cool, especially in this world of financial modelling Excel. Sydney in particular, Melbourne's awful, don't tell anyone. But there is a really strong foundation of knowledgeable people here. What we've seen, it's Sydney and London has been progressing this industry quite a lot. And I know you met some influential people in that space, and it's really cool when you can do that, because you can be like here in Manly, you live by the beach and you work in a world city. It's pretty cool. It's not a lot of places you can do that, and so I love modelling and that sort of stuff, all sorts. But it's also fun to live somewhere where you can live a good life.
It feels like the pace of life is just that little bit slower and more appropriate maybe. It feels like people actually stop and enjoy the finer things in life a little bit more. The weather definitely helps. I told you I need to improve my kayaking skills because I ended up on the long, thin kayaks and fell off quite a lot, and I cut my finger and then I got told about sharks. It was a horrendous day. But
sounds like you've still got some surfing to learn.
Surfing, yeah, that's on the list. Yeah, okay. All right. Well, look, thank you so much for your time. It's really interesting kind of hearing from somebody who has been in this space, you know, by the sounds of it, from the kind of inception of financial modelling as a career, as an industry. Yeah, I really appreciate it.
Yeah, no worries. Well, we'll do a new version next year then.
Year's time. Yeah, I'll be back. Thanks, Rickard.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
So look, it's been really interesting for me personally to get the chance to speak to some of the experts in modelling and Excel whilst I've been out in Australia. And I think you can tell from what you've heard, it's not like everybody is immediately convinced that we should start implementing LET, LAMBDA, maybe even dynamic arrays into the kind of traditional financial modelling work that we do. They're clearly really powerful tools, but we have to find the right places to use them. And I think it'll come down to finding the places where they solve a problem. You don't just use the latest flashy tool because it's the latest flashy tool. It needs to solve something. It needs to move the needle somewhat to get people who are responsible for teams of professional modelers to change the way they train those teams of professional modelers. I actually think, you know, the more that I think about this over my time in Australia, that companies don't just need a tech stack strategy, they don't just need a data strategy. I think they need an Excel strategy as well. There are so many different ways you can use Excel. I think we have to consciously make a decision at the ground level, whilst maybe complex ERP system implementations are going on over, you know, multiple years. At the ground level, day in, day out, how are you going to use Excel? How is your team going to use Excel to get the work done month in, month out as effectively as possible? That brings me to the end of the Excel related part of this first ever episode of the Excel on the Road video series. As I said at the start though, I didn't just go to Australia to talk about spreadsheets. As a semi-digital nomad, which I really just mean by that I like to spend a month or so abroad in a country at a time, and then because I miss my dog too much, I like to go back and spend another month at home in England. I also went to Australia to get a bit of downtime. And I went to meet some of my own business community members. My company, Full Stack Modeler, is a global training program for people looking to improve their own Excel, financial modeling, data analytics, and data visualization skills. And we run Full Stack through an incredible online training and community platform. And I was really lucky to meet some of my longest standing members during my time out in Australia. So here's just a snippet of what I got up to when I wasn't talking about Excel. And I really want to say, just before I close off, thank you to everyone in my community who gave up so much of their time to meet me and make my trip to Australia so special. Thank you to Rickard and Danielle for being such great interviewees. And this is going to sound really cheesy, but thank you to Australia, to the people of Australia. What an incredible country Australia is. It really did blow my mind. I loved every minute of my time there. People, on the whole, just seem to be living at a slightly more sensible pace, enjoying each day as it comes, and I found myself having so many long and seemingly genuine conversations with random people as I travelled around. People on the bus, people at coffee shops, people at restaurants, and it really stuck with me. It's not something that I'm used to coming from England and pretty much an hour or so away from London. If you'd like to learn a little bit more about what I do, then you'll find a few links below. But for now, thank you for watching, and I'll see you back here for episode 2 when I let you in on the highlights of my trip to Toronto. Oh, I missed you so much.